Religion. It can be powerful. It can be a problem. It can bring people together or it can pull them apart. I think one of the biggest parts of religion is not understanding what other people believe. Everybody's good, or at least they try to be good. And what is the system they use to bring themselves closer to the person they want to be a better person? Sometimes it's religion. Now, I don't know anything more about that religion than this religion. And so that's why I think sometimes it's a good idea to understand what other people believe. Today, we're going to talk about Unitarianism. And I'm excited because I have a pastor or a reverend that's going to come on the show. He's going to tell us a little bit about all the things they believe in and how they approach their religious service and beliefs. Unitarianism began in the 16th century as a Protestant denomination that rejected the doctrine of the Trinity. It developed in Poland, Transylvania, England, and America. In the mid-19th century, Unitarianism became a religion of reason and liberal theology. And in 1961, the Unitarianism and Universalism merged to form the Unitarian Universalism, a creedless movement that welcomes religious liberals from around the world. And that is what we're going to learn about today. So stick around.
Welcome to High Strangeness, where we ask questions and explore all that is strange and unexpected in our reality.
Welcome to High Strangeness. I'm Tony, and this is the place where we talk about all things strange and unexpected. But not today. Today we're going to dive into more of the unexpected, because faith and belief systems are so important. And more people are looking for meaning and value in their life, but not just a new home or a car, but they want something deeper. So day in and day out, we drive past places of worship. And if we're not too distracted, we wonder what might be going on in there. What do those people believe? There are so many religions and belief systems in America. So today I'm excited because we are going to learn about Unitarianism. And I'm very excited to have somebody to help us understand more about that. And that is Reverend Monica Dobbins from right here in Salt Lake City, Utah. Monica, thank you for being on the show. And how are you doing today?
Oh, thank you. I'm really excited to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I love learning more and more about things. And that's why I do this, because everything for me is just a wonderful opportunity to learn different things, whether they're strange or just normal things that I just don't know much about. So it's great. So I think I talked with you about this before, but I'm curious about your opinion on the changes right there in Salt Lake City. So many things are happening between a new hockey team and the sports complex that I think they're wanting to do, as well as the Olympics in a few years. What are your thoughts about just all of this activity and change there in Salt Lake City?
You know, I think it's a mixed bag. I think there are some really exciting things happening in Salt Lake. It is exciting to see new development happening downtown. I'm really excited to see transit being expanded. I'm a big transit nerd. I love to take the trains, and I've gotten really spoiled to that in Salt Lake. Very different from my native Southeast. So I think there's a lot of good things happening. I also think that there's some real challenges. I'm disappointed to see the legislature not do anything about our Great Salt Lake. And that is an environmental disaster waiting to happen. So I'd really like to see more motion on that. I think there's a real housing shortage, and we're seeing our legislature focusing on these, sort of petty political battles instead of dealing with the real issues. So I don't know. We'll see where our leadership takes us in the next few years, but definitely a lot of potential.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. In fact, maybe you have the same thought from time to time. When they work on roads about 2 years later than they should have, I think of the same thing that you were talking about with the Great Salt Lake, which is, why do we wait till it's a crisis before we do things? It's crazy.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I've been on your website, and it's pretty cool. And I've seen, some footage and stuff of your chapel there, which is really very nice. I was curious about your congregation. Are they coming in from all over the valley or just Salt Lake City? Where do you see people coming in for your services?
It's a great question. Most of our congregation lives close to downtown in Salt Lake, but we're really surprised to have a lot of folks joining us online. It's always been the case that we would have a few folks driving from far away in Utah just because there are not a lot of churches like ours in Utah. But it's now the case too that since the pandemic we started live streaming our services to make them more accessible during lockdown, and then we kept it going because it was really getting an audience. Our own people like it when they're out of town or when they're not feeling well. They can still participate in the service by watching online. But now we're seeing people who are actually joining our church who live far away, in rural parts of the state or even in other states. We have members from Washington and California, and I think that that's probably going to continue. We're now in the live stream era for real.
Yeah. I think it's such a cool thing. I'm glad that it's happened because it really allows folks to stay connected, whether they move away or not. And older folks, too, who struggle to get out. What an opportunity for them to still be able to tie into services. I think it's wonderful.
Absolutely. It's a disability accommodation that I don't think we could have imagined 5 years ago. It also allows people who aren't really sure, maybe they don't know what a Unitarian Universalist church does, and it can be intimidating to try a new faith community. So it gives people a chance to get a taste of what we do before they show up in person.
Yeah, for sure. When I talked to you briefly the other day, I wasn't sure how many other Unitarian churches are in Utah. And I think you said 5 or 4.
There's
Is
4,
that true?
yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
We've got churches in St. George, Ogden, Logan, and then our sibling church down in South Valley, which is in Cottonwood Heights.
Perfect. Now, with some churches, they're very different from one congregation to the other. And some churches, it's like you're just stepping into the same building, but just in another state. Are services and the way you guys approach your religious practice very similar from one congregation to the other?
No, it's one thing that's really unique about Unitarian Universalism is that each congregation is different. We have about 1,000 congregations across the United States and Canada, and each one is really sort of tailored to the local experience. Here in Salt Lake City, of course, we have a lot of former LDS Latter-day Saints, and so there's a particular kind of spiritual needs that those folks have. We also, in our congregation, our church was founded in 1891, so it's a very old congregation, and a lot of the folks who were migrating west from the East Coast started this congregation because they were not Latter-day Saints and they were trying to establish sort of that Gentile presence, I guess, in Salt Lake at that time. So that's why you have this sort of New England style church building that we worship in that was built in 1927. And I think that the character of our congregation also sort of reflects those historical movements. But, if you were to visit a church in New England, you might see more of that Christian heritage, that sort of the Puritan history. If you visited a church in California, it's going to be, this maybe a round chapel with very earth-centered themes. So it really just depends on where in the country and who are the people that worship there.
That's pretty interesting. I think that makes it kind of fun for somebody traveling because they get to experience, hey, what am I going to see in this chapel, right? That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So I have to be honest, I don't know a lot about the Unitarianism faith. I think I had mentioned to you the other day that I thought I knew that there was like a few key people in history like Charles Darwin and Isaac Newton. And I even talked about Christopher Reeve's Superman, right? That they were practicers of this faith. But I don't know much else about it, so I'm really excited to understand more. And I have about probably 14 to 16 questions, which I think probably we'll answer as we talk anyway. But I think let's start off very basic, right? I think Unitarianism is a Christian religion, correct?
It was a Christian religion. Now,
Okay.
not so much. But its roots are in Christianity.
See, this is why I asked the question. I had the same thing. I spoke to somebody in a Quaker faith, and I asked the same question, and they really taught me like what it's all about. So thank you. That's good. So it originated there, and it's kind of evolved in different directions. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so it's you see Unitarianism become popular for the first time in Eastern Europe during the Reformation. And it's this idea that God is one, that there's only one God. And it also kind of takes this very heretical idea that Jesus was not God. So in most of Christianity, you have the Trinity, right? Which is God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, this sort of 3-in-1. It's never made any sense to Unitarians. I'm not sure it makes sense to Trinitarians, honestly. But for us, we said Jesus makes more sense as a human being, as a teacher, as one of us. And by that, we can live up to his example. So Unitarianism comes over to the United States in the it comes over in the 1600s with the Puritans, really. Becomes a formalized religion in the 19th century. At the same time, you have this idea of universalism that comes over from England, which is the idea that there's no such thing as hell, that God did not create us and then set us up to fail and create an eternal punishment for us, that God loves us and wants us to succeed. And so that idea also starts becoming popular in the United States in the 19th century. After the Civil War, both of those ideas kind of struggled. But in 1961, after a century of sort of coming closer and closer together, the Unitarians and the Universalists joined forces, merged their churches, and became the Unitarian Universalist Church. And so we have that heritage of believing in a single God, believing that in the goodness of God and the goodness of people, that we are inherently good and worthy, but also have sort of pulled away from Christianity and opened up to a multitude of faiths. So now we have a lot of Buddhists who are UUs. We have Muslims and Jews and people of all the different world religions, and also a lot of atheists and seekers and agnostics. That's a really important part of our tradition as well.
Wow. That's pretty cool. So a lot of people are finding a home there with Unitarianism.
Yeah.
That
And
is
we
cool.
love that diversity.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really neat because, in a day and age where people are kind of looking at each other, this allows everybody to come in and to really find the spiritual lifting that they can get from one religion, right?
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
What in many traditions, if you wanted to join a church or a mosque or some other community of faith, you would be asked to adhere to a creed. Whether they call it that or not, most faiths want you to say, this is what we believe in common. But in Unitarian Universalism, we actually don't do that. We believe in a freedom of belief. We acknowledge that you can't really get any group of humans to all believe the same thing anyway. So we focus on our covenant, which is our agreements about how we're going to be in relationship together. We hold each other accountable for our behaviors and our actions. So we're much more interested in what you do than what you believe.
That's interesting. And that's really cool too. I can see that being very appealing these days, right? Because a lot of people, or at least I hear a lot of people, get frustrated with the strictness of many religions, and they go, maybe I just don't feel strongly about this part or that part, right? But I still enjoy the gathering and stuff. So Unitarianism seems to have taken care of that.
Well, we think so, at least in a way.
Yeah.
We just recognize that what we know about the universe and the way that the world works is always changing and growing. We're always learning new information, and the things that we believe will probably change to adapt to that new information. We don't want to continue to live in a world that's already passed us by, right? We want to live in this moment. So we know that our beliefs will change, and that's okay. But the way that we treat each other should not change. We should always be kind to each other, observe healthy boundaries, lift each other up, these kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, and that was going to be one of my questions, is about the core beliefs, right? But you're kind of already going there. So that's really cool to get an understanding and an insight in there. Is there anything else about just the whole way that the Unitarianism faith approaches this world and the people they interact with?
Yeah, so all the congregations that make up the Unitarian Universalist Association, which is sort of our umbrella body, we have a General Assembly every year. And every few years at the General Assembly, we get together and talk about what do we all have in common? What's sort of the bare minimum that we share in our faith? And so last year, our General Assembly voted on a new set of values. Not really new, but maybe a new statement of our values. And so there are 6 values that all center around love. Love is always at the center of our faith, and we're discerning what does that mean for us now. But the values include justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, which is really important for us. There's 2, generosity, and I'm leaving one out. That's a good start.
That's a good start. Yeah, sorry I put you on the spot with some of that.
If you have to list something, you're going to forget one.
Right. Well, you mentioned pluralism. Define what that means. Just because I think people could interpret that differently. What does that mean?
Yeah, pluralism is the one that I think people may not be familiar with in their daily life, but it's so important now, especially as we're seeing the norms of democracy change around us. For us, pluralism is sort of about diversity in a way. It's recognizing that all people come together with different experiences from their lives, different identities, different beliefs, and different ways of being. And in order for us all to function together, we have to be able to recognize and respect those differences while also learning how to live together. That the diverse points of view and experiences make us stronger. It's actually not as strong of a community when everybody believes the same thing and everybody has the same experiences. But it's a challenge, right? People can get, dug into their beliefs. They can they can see things one way, and it's hard to let those things go. So pluralism just reminds us that we're all there for the same purpose, and the way that we work together to overcome our differences is what makes us stronger in the end.
Yeah, and I'm also hearing it brings it back to love, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So you had spent just a second there talking about the origins, going back to the first settlers here, and not only the United States, but here in the Intermountain area. And you've kind of shared that there's been some evolutions or changes over time, right? Is there anything that's been carried over from the old days that you guys still do today? Like when I look at your chapel and you see that old style, I love that. It really looks cool. But is there anything else?
Yeah, I think that if you're familiar with sort of a basic Christian order of worship service, you'll find, that there's a lot that's familiar in the way that we do worship together. I'm a preacher, and I preach a sermon on Sunday. We do religious music. We have a hymnal like most Protestant churches do. And we observe some of the same ceremonies, weddings and memorial services and things like that. Few Unitarian churches now baptize people, but we do dedicate our children to the community as a way to say that not the children becoming part of us, but that we as adults are committing ourselves to caring for these children. So some similar rites and rituals. Yeah.
Pretty cool. Yeah. The community, how do Unitarianisms participate in the greater community? Are they like everybody else? They'll participate in politics and business, and is it very natural that way and fit across normal society that way?
Oh, yes. Unitarian Universalists are really known for our social justice action. And part of it is that Unitarian Universalism has this strong humanist tradition, meaning that we don't know if there is a God or not. There are some of us who believe in God, many of us who don't believe in God, a lot of us who aren't certain what to believe about God. But what we do believe is that God is not going to save us from what we're doing right now. Human beings are responsible for the state of humanity and the state of the earth, and so we bear responsibility for the way that things look outside of our church walls. So because of that, because we're not waiting for somebody to swoop in and save us, we are so active in the community. You'll see Unitarian Universalists participating in politics. We're very committed to democracy. In fact, that's one of our pillars. Our congregations are governed democratically, and we really believe in voting, yes, but more the idea that each person should have a voice, and that each person's perspective is important and necessary to the functioning of the whole. So you'll see us out there advocating for voting rights and anything that has to do with human rights, really.
Really neat, yeah. What is your church service like? What can somebody expect if they come? So it's on Sundays, and then what might they see if they either come electronically or physically?
Well, as we talked about before, each UU congregation is a little different. So I can just speak to what we do in our services here in Salt Lake. You'll see that we sing hymns out of a hymnal. And some of them are hymns that you would probably recognize if you were, a Methodist or some other sort of Protestant Christian. Old, famous, familiar hymns. We may or may not pray, but we try to make the prayers inclusive for people who have a diverse view on God. So for some people, praying to God will feel very natural. For other people, praying to God will feel kind of empty and fake. But it doesn't mean that they can't have a prayer life. Maybe their idea of prayer is just different. So we try to pray in ways that make space for all of these different kinds of experiences and ideas about God. Like I said, I preach about a 15 or 20 minute sermon. It's not always based on a scripture, but if it is based on a scripture, it might be a Christian scripture, or it might be a Buddhist scripture, or it might be a poem, because we have this tradition that people in every age have wisdom to share, and so we don't just look to the Bible as the one-time data drop, right, of information, but that wisdom is always being revealed to us. So we share poets and contemporary stuff, and we draw from all different kinds of sources.
So all things uplifting, basically, is what you're saying. Yeah. So throughout your week, before you do a sermon, is it a situation where you feel either the spirit of something or some enlightenment that you feel you want to share. Is that where the message comes each week? And that's why it might come from different sources, poems or things like that?
Well, I personally believe that. I can't
Yeah.
speak for all Unitarian Universalist ministers. I think that we reflect the diversity of our congregations, and so ministers approach their work in different kinds of ways. But I believe that we do encounter things in our daily lives that have meaning for us and for other people. So I do pay attention to kind of what crosses my path, what's placed before me. And I'm always listening to what the people of my congregation are talking about, what they bring to me when we have a confidential meeting about their life, when I'm doing pastoral care. I want to know what's going on in their lives, and then I'm trying to figure out where's the meaning in this. How does this speak to all people, and what can we draw from that that's good for everybody to know?
That's pretty good. So I think that's really exciting for your congregation because you're very reactive and you are listening, right? So you're trying to address or share what's most important at that moment. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I was curious, is there any special activities or events that you guys do for your youth? Anything like that?
Yeah, I think one thing that our churches are known for is a program called Our Whole Lives. This is sexuality education for kindergartners through high schoolers. Actually, it goes on up to adults, but we teach it for all youth ages. And this program was developed in coordination with the United Church of Christ, which is also a very liberal Christian tradition that's very close to the Unitarian Universalists. And it really is comprehensive sex ed. We start with the very young ages, just what is my body, what are the body parts, what are their biological names, so that kids get used to using the real names of their body parts instead of nicknames. We think that this actually protects kids and makes it easier for them to talk about what's happening to their bodies, and it's preventative against sexual abuse, right? We also teach kids at that young age about consent. Who is allowed to touch your body, and how are they allowed to touch it? We teach these kids that your body belongs to you and to nobody else. And then it progresses at an age-appropriate way all the way up to high school, where we're talking about consent in a new way, right? Building on those earlier lessons. All of this comes out of our belief that each person is worthwhile and dignified in their own right, and that every person should have sovereignty over their own body and make choices about their own body. We just don't believe that keeping information from kids or prescribing top-down sexual ethics really does anybody any good. And certainly in these days, when schools are teaching either no information or bad information about sex, it's really a time when they need accurate, healthy information from someplace that's not TikTok.
Yeah.
So we're happy to provide that for our kids. And I can tell you, my own son has been through all the levels, and he used to roll his eyes like, "Oh, Mom, you're making me take so much OWL." We call it OWL, Our Whole Lives. But he's been really so well prepared for situations that any teenager would come across. So I believe in it personally and professionally.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are tackling something that a lot of religions either are afraid or just don't want to tackle. So and you're so right. Like, what they're getting taught in school or not, or with their friends or on the internet is scary. So to give them something, more balanced, more wholesome, that's really good. Yeah.
Yeah. We believe in, I keep saying we believe after I told you we don't really have a statement of belief. But I think generally Unitarian Universalists support science, and we're excited by new scientific discoveries. And so when the research tells us that kids need this information and they thrive when they have it, we take that really seriously.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and since we're here already with this kind of subject, and I feel like you've touched it, but let me just ask it, and then you can also deliver it in a certain way, which is the position of morality, ethics, and social issues. So I'm getting a feel for where you guys come from, but I'll let you just say it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll just put it out there that we're really progressive. We might be the furthest church to the left politically, but it all comes out of this real deep conviction about human liberty, that each person should be able to decide for themselves. So, people may take different positions within Unitarian Universalism, and I can't say that every UU is going to be politically to the left, but the church generally is. And we think that encourages people to be free, to make decisions for themselves, and we want people to make decisions for themselves, but also to understand themselves as part of a community, that we have a responsibility to each other. So it's not libertarian. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think
it's
so.
Not a sense of like you can do whatever you want to. You can act on your own conscience, and we recognize that the actions that we take have impacts on people. So we try to have impacts that are positive and life-giving and healthy and beneficial for everybody.
Right. No, I'm glad you shared that, because I think I hate when I see people who don't feel like they fit anywhere, right? And Utah's most of it is a very conservative state and things like that, but people need to be happy with what fits, right? So it's good to hear that they have an opportunity to visit a congregation like yours and see, maybe something a little bit different that maybe they already agree mostly with, right?
Yeah, I think so too.
So you've also touched on this a little bit. I'm curious about the religious position on science and just general reasoning versus religion. And I ask this because some religions, for example, might say, we will not transfuse blood because we don't believe in that, or we don't believe in this or that. I'm curious the position on science and new discoveries for Unitarianism.
Yeah, there's a lot of scientists who are part of Unitarian Universalism. A lot of doctors and other kinds of science-adjacent people, I guess I'd say. We really have a deep appreciation for scientific inquiry. We want to know more about the universe. We're not afraid of that. And I think we're a curious bunch of people, We want to know how things work. And we try, I guess we're human, but we try to be open to what science tells us, even if it's not what we expected. But to that end, we're really, we follow the research on COVID, for example. We were some of the first to close our congregations to in-person worship because we could see the evidence that COVID was a dangerous virus and that it was going to make people sick. And in fact, we're still taking some COVID precautions even now. So, so that's just one example of how we let science lead the way when we're making decisions that are impacted by that.
Sounds good. How about for religious texts or guidance materials? What do you guys utilize for that? Do you use the Bible, or do you use other things, or a combination of things?
That's a great question. I think that we recognize all of the world's great religious texts as inspired. Whether they're divinely inspired or not is up for debate, I guess. But they're inspired anyway. They all have something really important to teach us about human nature, human community, and how we ought to treat each other. The Golden Rule is a thread through all of the world's major religions, and that's something that really nobody can debate. At the same time, I think that we're starting to have more of an awareness that the world's texts they don't necessarily belong to us in the same way that they belong to a faith community. For example, the Quran belongs to the Muslim community. It's not for us to decide what it says, if we're not Muslim. Or the Christian texts, we want to have sort of a circumspect outlook on these texts and what they mean, that there are other communities that have the authority to say what those mean. But we still look to them for inspiration, and I think that you'll find you use sort of looking for those common threads of what do these texts have to say about what it is to be a person.
Yeah, that's good. I myself have found through my journey of talking to people that there's so much truth in so many places that sometimes people lock themselves away or refuse to see it. And that's too bad, because there really is a lot of good stuff out there. So,
yeah, I totally agree. We have a sense that each person has a connection to the divine, whatever that is. We all have it. And nobody's left out of that. So how we use that connection is something that we talk about a lot. And what are the responsible uses of your own inner light and your inner divinity? But whatever it is, we've all got it. It's common to all humans. So we all have a responsibility to use it wisely.
Yeah. Monica, how about societal holidays and things like that? Do you guys observe those? Or are there other festivals or holy days that you guys observe?
There's not any that are prescribed. I'll put it that way. Unitarian Universalists, I will say, usually go big on Christmas. If you look back at our history in the United States, the Unitarians were always big in Christmas. We were some of the first to have Christmas trees back in the 19th century. And we're connected to a lot of the popular Christmas songs and things like that. So it's always been an important holiday for us. Certainly UUs are not required to observe it or anything. We don't have a liturgical calendar, but we're just big fans of Christmas, I guess. It's sort of that idea of hope being born into the world, that there are miracles happening every day, that every child is a miracle. So I think Christmas is probably more important to most UUs than Easter. As for the religions of the world, it's sort of like the texts. We Unitarian Universalists are overwhelmingly white people, and we have done some reckoning around, cultural appropriation, and is it appropriate for us to worship holidays that we don't have a cultural connection to? That said, if you go to congregations in different geographic places in the United States, you'll find that they may have a connection to a holiday that's really popular in that part of the country. So a congregation that has a lot of Mexican immigrants might celebrate Day of the Dead. And that's important for that congregation in a way that it might not be for a congregation in Minneapolis or New York,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. The Unitarian faith, what is the belief of where we came from and where we go? Because, a lot of people, as they get older, they start to fear that thing, like, oh, what happens to me now, right? How is that discussed in the Unitarian faith?
Gosh, that's a good question. I think that you'll be hard-pressed to find a UU that doesn't believe in evolution, right? So I think that we generally believe the creation myths of the Bible and other texts to be myths, that, and I won't say that it's not true, but it's maybe not true literally, that it's more of a story about how we might think about the Big Bang or the beginning of the human race or whatever, which for me carries a lot more meaning than a literal 7-day creation story or whatever. That said, because I think most UUs believe in this scientific story of how we came about, there are many who don't believe in an afterlife, and there are many more who believe if there is an afterlife, it's a great mystery, and we don't know what there is after our death. I think that that's probably the most common view. There might be something, but we just don't know. Historic Universalism, of course, says that there's no hell. And it also says that whatever happens to us happens to everyone. There won't be a separation where the good people go over here and the bad people go over here. Whatever happens to us all. So we can take some comfort in that we're not looking forward to an eternal punishment after our lives. Personally, I believe that our physical cells return to the earth and become nourishment for other living beings, and maybe our ideas or our souls or our spirits, maybe that happens to them too, but I just don't know. When I talk with people who are dying, I often get this sense that they are looking forward to solving this mystery, that hey, this is the one big mystery that's left, and now I get a chance to find out what it is.
Yeah, that's amazing. One of the things that I think is interesting that I'm getting from our conversation is the love and the service. A lot of times people are afraid of the afterlife, or they're looking for the reward, right? And so I got to be a good person because I have to qualify for the reward. But that's not necessarily a driver here. It is being loving and serving other people. If I can share for a quick minute, I met somebody one time who was an atheist, and he was the most serviceable, loving person I ever met. But he didn't believe in anything, right? And I was so impressed with that because I said to myself, man, you're better than most people because you're doing all the right things for the right reasons. That's amazing. So I feel like the same thing, right, is what's going on and what you guys are talking about. Yeah.
Exactly that. Yeah. We do it because it's the right thing to do. And we do it also because when other people are better off, we're better off. It's sort of that rising tide lifts all boats. We know that if we're all going to the same place in the end, then it's best for us to all go in the same way, to have the same access to resources, to level hierarchies, to the extent that they don't help humanity, to the extent that they hold back human flourishing. We want to see everybody do well.
Yeah. That's a good thing, right? Yeah. So I think I understand the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So is anyone welcome to your services?
Well, I think if you asked UUs, they would probably say yes, everyone is welcome. But I actually challenge them on that when I can. I don't think that everyone is welcome. Everyone is welcome who shares our values and is willing to live with our covenant. But if I saw somebody come through our doors with, say, an offensive slogan or an offensive symbol, I would ask them to leave. Like, come back when you've changed your shirt, because we don't accept that kind of speech here. It's really important when you want to be welcoming to as many people and ideas as possible to know what's not acceptable. And for us, any kind of hate or exclusion or damaging hierarchies, those things are just not welcome in our churches. And they create exclusion that we don't want. So, yeah, it sounds kind of bad to say not everyone is welcome, but I think that actually makes the place safer, especially for those who in society usually find themselves on the outside.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that honesty, because guess what? I think a big confusion that people experience out there is whether it's Christian values or just love in general. There is a difference between loving and also allowing that person to show some respect back for what you're doing for them, right? I mean, sometimes people get confused and think that they have to be used and abused to be loving or Christ-like or whatever, right? I don't think that's true. So I hear what you're saying, and I think what you're saying is we're here, we're glad to have you here, but show the respect for what you're doing because we're here doing this, right?
Yeah. And I think many of us have had that experience of going to a church where they say everyone is welcome and they're really friendly at the door and you get a good feeling from the worship, but over time you start feeling like, well, I can't continue to be welcome here until I change who I am or the way that I believe or the way that I think. I know this is especially common for queer folks. They go to a church and they're like, well, you're welcome here, but you have to stop being queer or you have to stop acting on it or, whatever. That's not how we operate. We're like, you're welcome here if you uphold the same values that we do and you're willing to live within the agreements that our community has made.
Yeah. Very good. So one question I have, which is, what would you consider maybe the biggest misconception out there that people have about the Unitarianism faith? Is there anything that shows up as you talk to people?
Yeah, actually, it's related to what we were just talking about. I hear people say, well, in Unitarian Universalism, you can believe whatever you want. And it's not really that you can believe whatever you want. It's more that you are free to follow your conscience and explore your beliefs, and that beliefs can change. But it doesn't mean you can believe whatever you want. As I said before, we have a responsibility to each other, and we recognize that sometimes our beliefs can lead us to do harm to other people. So in those cases, we need to change our beliefs. So I think that's the biggest misconception. Sometimes I hear people say, well, Unitarian Universalism is a cult, but I think sometimes people just slap cult onto whatever they don't like. So
or don't understand. Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to say it's a problem that a lot of religions experience these days because of secularism and stuff in the United States, is you're seeing people are not being included or not participating in religion and churches as much as they used to. At least that's what it looks like. What is your feeling about that? Like, do you see growth still, or is this staying stagnant? And do you see like the views of the world competing so hardly against what you're doing that it's just tougher these days?
That's an interesting question. I'll just say to start with that our congregation is growing right now. We're experiencing a lot of new people coming through our doors. I think a lot of it has to do with the election of Donald Trump, the re-election, I should say, that people recognized that it was going to be a scary time for a lot of folks who share our values, especially democracy. You know, if you value democracy, then it can be really hard to watch these democratic norms that have been established over generations just kind of being sledgehammered. That's pretty tough. And so people are coming together looking for connection and community. They want to be reassured that they're not alone and that other people share their values at this time. As far as the world encroaching on us, that doesn't feel like a problem that we really struggle with, because we really want to live in the world. We're not a people who want to live separately and be apart from the world. We want to be right in it, dealing with the real world issues of the moment. So, yeah, when the world encroaches on us, we're like, all right, what's the challenge? How can we meet it?
Right. Well, it's, as I learn a little bit here about the faith, I really see how it could be very well accepted in society, as opposed to some of those other religions out there that maybe require different things, right? So that's pretty cool. Okay, so, we're talking high strangeness on the podcast. So I have to ask this weird question or two here, because it's our show, right? What does the religion or belief system think about UFOs, life outside of the earth, spirits, apparitions, strange phenomena? What is your position on those things?
Well, I don't think that we have a position, but I do think that because of our curiosity and our acceptance of scientific methods and reason, I think a lot of UUs are sort of open to these ideas. You'll probably find believers and skeptics in every congregation. I will say that historically, the Universalists were very open to the idea of communicating with spirits, communicating with the dead, especially in the 19th century. You'd have people who would do seances and were interested in tarot cards and things like that. Actually, I'm a tarot reader myself. I've been reading cards for 25 years now, so that's important for me. But you also have, I think, a lot of folks who practice earth-based practices in Unitarian Universalism, people who might consider themselves pagans or Wiccans or some other sort of earth-based religion. And those folks are going to be interested in magic and ritual and divination, spiritual connections in that way. And yes, there are a lot of UUs who are interested in UFOs too, because we're interested in space and the universe. We want to know what else is out there. But I think it's sort of like the general population that we don't know, and so there's a lot of wild stories, theories and fantasies, and, who knows? It's not really a matter of religion for us, but I think we're a curious bunch, and we want to know what's out there.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, well, look, I've seen on your website your chapel. It's really nice. Your website's really cool, informative, inviting. I like the sample or the sermon sampler that you had on there. Can you talk about that and then your Torch newsletter? Like, what might people see in those tools or resources?
Oh, gosh. So our newsletter, our website just got remade. And I'm not totally familiar with what all is on there right now.
So maybe I hopped on, because I just hopped on recently, so maybe it's different. Yeah, sorry.
I'm a busy person. I'm trusting somebody else to manage the website. But I will say that our Torch newsletter really tries to focus on the activities that are happening in the community. And there is so much happening. We have a women's circle. We have Queer Joy Night once a month. We have our 3 choirs. We have a chancel choir, a junior choir for our youth, and a bell choir. And we have a monthly jam session where you can bring your guitar, your ukulele, and play along. We have, what else do we have going on? There's AA meetings happening every day at the church. And we have, once a month, I'm teaching a class called Build Your Own Democracy, which is sort of a community organizing workshop, and you can bring your beer or wine, no liquor, but you can bring your drinks. It's on a Friday night, and we just kind of jam out about democracy and direct democracy especially. How do we behave as citizens in the world? What are the tools that we can use to strengthen our democracies, especially on the local level? So there's just, I've scratched the surface. There's so much happening at our church all the time.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing some of those things. And that's the thing here, is to whet somebody's appetite, and they can look into it more. Now, if people want to learn more about Unitarianism, what would you suggest they do?
Oh, great question. Check out uua.org. That's sort of the homepage for the Unitarian Universalist Association. You can get a sense of what the values are that all UU congregations share, and some of what's happening at the national level, which often reflects what's happening at the local level. You can check us out on our YouTube channel, and that on the YouTube channel you can watch worship services from all the way back years ago. You can watch musical performances that have happened at our church and lots of other cool stuff. And then, of course, we'd love for you to just come to a Sunday service and get involved, introduce yourself. We'd love to meet you.
That's great. That was good. That was going to be my next question. So if somebody wants to try it out, of course, make sure you come respectfully, right? Would they reach out to somebody or just show up, or what would be the best thing for them to do?
Yeah, just feel free to come. We're open at 9 and 11 most Sundays. And yeah, we love visitors. We have a very welcoming atmosphere, and yeah, we love it when people give us a try.
That's awesome. Well, look, I've got my questions answered. Is there anything you would like to say to the people out there about this? Because, there may be something else that would be important for people to hear.
Yeah, I just think that right now we're in a time in our country when there's so much that's uncertain. People are feeling really lost and hopeless. A lot of people are, sitting at home doom scrolling and feeling very disconnected. And I would say if you can join a faith community that's aligned with your values, then at least you will know that you're not alone. I really think that is our mission right now, is just to let people know that they're not alone and that they can do something. We all still have agency in our lives. We can still make choices. And for me, the most important choice that I can make is to be with other people.
That's great. Thank you so much. Well, there you go, everybody. Unitarianism. Just a little touch on understanding what it's about. I'm so excited to have been able to sit with you, Reverend Monica Dobbins, and having a chance to hear some of these things, not just from somebody else, but from somebody actually doing it and part of the faith. It's wonderful. So as we wrap up today, I just want to say to everybody, check it out, see what's there. And hey, if this sounds like something you're interested in, you know the website, and you can easily find the location. And it sounds like, from what I've seen, even just watching your the sermon sampler on the website, it sounds like a really cool and fun service that you guys have. So that's great. And as I wrap up here today, I'm saying this not for this episode, but just because I say it at the end of every episode, because we do talk about paranormal and things like that. I say, remember, there's a lot of strange and unexpected in our reality. So always keep your minds, eyes, and ears open. And until next time, stay safe. Thank you, Monica, so much for sharing with us. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.